Folks, welcome back to another episode of The Fallen Badge. Today we're going to look at the murder of Officer Jonathan Schmidt, Trumman, Arkansas Police Department. Folks, Officer Schmidt was 30 years old. He had 4 years on with the Trumman Police Department. Now, he was married and he had 3 kids. Now, they said ever since he was 9 years old, he wanted to be a policeman. Now, he grew up there in Trumman, and for everything I read, he was a good man and a good policeman. Now, as we're going to see when we get through with this episode, we watch a little video, we're going to find out he was a tough fella, because he's sure going to take a lot of punishment. And he kept on keeping on. Now, the people that's going to be in the center of this incident, they're not very good people. You're going to see they're tied up in the meth trade one way or the other, either using it or selling it or close enough to it that they're getting fleas off the dog. Now, Trumman's a small town, about 7,300 people, and it's south of Jonesboro. So I guess even in a small town, you're going to have mischief. That meth is a bad thing. And anybody that says selling drugs and dealing in drugs is a victimless crime or a non-violent crime, they evidently hadn't done too much reading. But I think this story right here, among many of the others that we've done, will tell you there's nothing about narcotics that is non-violent and victimless. Because Officer Schmidt sure is a victim of it. It's April 12th, 2011. Officer Schmidt's making a traffic stop there on Pine Street near an apartment complex. Now, inside that car is 4 people. There's a fella driving, his name is Brian. His girlfriend who owns the car, her name's April. She's sitting in the front passenger seat. Back seat, driver's side back seat, is a woman named Nikki. And then the right rear seat, the passenger seat, is our suspect. Now, I'm not sure if I've got the location exactly right. The local newspaper indicated it was on Pine, just out of the complex. But I swear I've looked at that video countless times and I can't seem to find a background that matches it, so I don't know if I'm missing something or what. But in any event, I'm going to show these events to have happened right inside the complex. What happens is all going to be the same, whether I'm off 200 or 300 yards one way or the other. Now, Officer Schmidt, when he made the stop, when he got out of his car, he didn't approach the car straight on, because now that would put him in a bad position. So right off the bat, he's taking care of business. He's going to go around behind his squad car and come up to approach the car. Now he's going to talk to the driver, which is Brian, and Brian, he doesn't have a valid driver's license. It's been suspended. He's also got a misdemeanor warrant out for his arrest. So Officer Schmidt, he's going to go on and handcuff Brian, pat him down. He's under arrest. Now, I sure would have given a quarter if he'd have taken old Brian and put him in the back of his squad car just to get him out of the way. But every department's different. Our department, they didn't like you to leave a handcuffed prisoner standing out, because the prisoner step out in traffic, get run over, or take off running, and then you got a whole new set of problems. But either way, Brian's sitting there in handcuffs. Now, about the time he's got Brian out, Officer Schmidt gets a second car on the scene, a sergeant whose last name's Overstreet. So he's pulled up about the time that Officer Schmidt's dealing with Brian. Now, after he's got Brian handcuffed, he goes to the left rear passenger door and he opens up the door, and there's that female, Nikki. Now he gets her out. Now, if I had another quarter, I'd bet Nikki's doing nothing but trying to cause a diversion. In fact, I can't prove it, but I'd say everything that the suspects are going to do during this whole scene is nothing but choreographed. As soon as Nikki gets out of the car, she's going to start running her mouth. First, she's trying to talk to Officer Schmidt, who's trying to do his job, and then she's going to start yakking at the sergeant. And she's also standing in the line of sight for the sergeant so that the sergeant can't see what's going on in the car. Because on this scene here, Officer Schmidt, he's the contact officer. He's doing all the talking. He's checking everybody. And the sergeant, he's the cover officer. He's supposed to be protecting Officer Schmidt. He's supposed to watch the suspects and keep an eye on his partner. Now, little Nikki, she's yakking the whole time, standing in front of the sergeant. Now, after she gets out of the car, Officer Schmidt, he hollers through the open left rear door and he asks the suspect in the back seat what his name and date of birth is. And the suspect tells him. So he runs that information to the dispatcher. Now, Officer Schmidt, he goes back over to Brian, the driver that he's got under arrest, and Brian's still standing out there. And he's talking to him for a few minutes, and he's checking him again, and Officer Schmidt's waiting to see what the dispatcher's going to say about the suspect. Now, while Officer Schmidt's still dealing with Brian, the dispatcher comes back and says the suspect's got a felony warrant. Now, I couldn't tell exactly what she said, but according to the court records, that's what she came back and said. that the suspect's got a rape warrant on him. So amongst all the other things that the suspect has got going against him, he evidently is not into consensual sex. Now, everybody on that scene pretty well heard the dispatcher say that, because later on, April, who's still sitting in the front seat, Nikki, who won't shut up, and Brian, they all hear the dispatcher say that, and so did the suspect. Now, you'll see on the video when the dispatcher says that the suspect's got a warrant, felony warrant, you're going to see Officer Schmidt. He looks up and he looks back at the back seat where the suspect's sitting. Now, Officer Schmidt, he's then going to leave Brian and he's going to go around to the back of the car and go over to the right rear door where the suspect's sitting. Now, it's dark inside the car, even though there's a door open. Evidently, the interior light's been disabled, intentionally or otherwise, so you can't see what's going on inside the car. And the cover officer, the sergeant, he's got Nikki standing in front of him yakking, so his field of vision's obscured and she's talking and he's actually answering her back, so he can't see what's going on even though he's got a flashlight. Now, Officer Schmidt, he opens up the left rear the right rear passenger door, and as soon as he does, the suspect sticks a .25 caliber pistol up at point blank range and he shoots Officer Schmidt. Now, that round struck Officer Schmidt in the chin, and that was the left side of Officer Schmidt's chin. Now, it passed through his left cheekbone, through the carotid artery, and exited out the back of his neck on the left side. Now, immediately upon being shot, Officer Schmidt pivots back to his right and kind of goes down. He bends at the waist. Now, the suspect gets out of the car, and by this time, the sergeant, as you can see from the video, he goes to pull his gun, thinks better of it, and he starts moving to his right because now the suspect's laying down rounds at him. So the fact that he moved was good, because if he'd have stood there, the suspect would have hit him. So the sergeant moves to his right, goes out of camera range, and goes back to the back of Officer Schmidt's car. Now, Officer Schmidt, after being momentarily stunned by that round, he moves to the rear of his squad car. And the suspect comes out, and he's just stalking the officers. He just immediately walks towards the rear of Officer Schmidt's car. Now, you'll see that the sergeant, he's crawling along the ground, and he comes up on the left front side of Officer Schmidt's car. Now, his gun's still in his holster, so he has still not pulled his gun, even though he's being met with deadly force. Now, Officer Schmidt reappears to the left front side of the sergeant's squad car, which would indicate that Officer Schmidt, after he went around the rear of his car, he went around the rear of the sergeant's car, went in front of the sergeant's car, and then went to the front of his car. Now, Brian and Nikki, they're in the background, standing in the grassy area on the other side of the suspect car. Now, when you first see Officer Schmidt, he's holding his weapon in his right hand. I don't know if he's fired any rounds. But you have to remember that first round he took, cutting the carotid artery, hitting him in the face. He's battling shock and blood loss. Now he's going to go to the front of his car and he's going to try to help the sergeant up. For whatever reason, the sergeant won't or can't stand up. And Officer Smith's trying to help him, and he's moving him around to the right front side of the squad car. Now when he gets to the right front side of the squad car, Officer Schmidt drops his gun. Now the reason he drops his gun is because of blood loss and shock. So he bends down and he picks his pistol back up, and he's still trying to tote the sergeant around, who can't seem to find his feet or his gun that he has in his holster. And you can see in the video, and by the way, you can see the video sped up. I've got it down in the description if you want to watch it at full speed. So they move around out of camera range again. Now the suspect's still coming. The suspect, he's stalking Officer Schmidt because he's went around behind Officer Schmidt's car, behind the sergeant's car, then he comes in front of the sergeant's car, and then in front of Officer Schmidt's car. And he's steadily screaming at him. So then he heads down the right front side. Now, if I'm not mistaken, by this time, the suspect actually has no rounds left in his gun. He's done shot them all up. But if you've got a method problem, you're probably not very good at counting rounds in your pistol. Now, when he gets around to the right side of Officer Schmidt's car, he stops and he picks up Officer Schmidt's pistol because he's dropped it. Because Officer Schmidt's having a hard time, obviously, if his motor functions now. In fact, the fact he's still moving is just beyond belief. Officer Schmidt just kept moving, and I don't know how. Now, according to the court records, Officer Schmidt then either collapses or sits down at the back or somewhere close to the rear of his squad car. He's somewhere out of camera range. Now, the court records further state that the sergeant, for whatever reason, left Officer Schmidt and went back to his squad car. I don't know what he was doing over there, because he's still got a gun with bullets in it, and Officer Schmidt ain't got his gun, and he's bleeding to death. Now, Officer Schmidt, who's all alone now, he's telling the suspect that don't shoot him anymore, that he's down. Now, the suspect hollers out a few more obscenities, and he executes Officer Schmidt. Now, the execution round, the ME estimated it was fired from either several inches up to 2 feet away, and this is Officer Schmidt's own pistol, .40 caliber. Now that bullet went into Officer Schmidt's right cheek, right next to the nose. The bullet went through his right upper jawbone, fractured the jawbone and the teeth in that area. The bullet then traveled through Officer Schmidt's tongue and lodged in his neck. And this round also cut through the carotid artery. So now Officer Schmidt's got his left and right carotid arteries cut. Now later on they would discover that Officer Schmidt had actually been hit with 2 other rounds. One round, which was probably from the .25, it hit him in the back of the right wrist, right near the base of the right thumb, and that's where it lodged there in the thumb. Now the other gunshot, the 4th gunshot, it had struck Officer Schmidt in the chest area, but the vest stopped it. Now that bullet in the chest was from the .25. And I imagine that round probably came right after he'd shot Officer Schmidt in the face on the initial volley. Now the suspect, after he gets done with that, he's going to walk off and leave the scene. And the sergeant reappears. Now I don't know which way the suspect was walking, but the sergeant popped up from somewhere and he shot the suspect in the back as he's walking away, which is illegal shooting for a violent fleeing felon. So Officer Schmidt's taken to the hospital. The suspect's taken to the hospital. The suspect lives, as they always do. And Officer Schmidt, he dies. Now, the suspect was put on trial, and he was given the death penalty. Even though the suspect claimed he had a mental deficiency, the jury didn't buy it, and he got a life sentence for the attempted murder of the sergeant, and he got 10 years for possession of meth that he had on his person. And the judge, who I've never met him, but I like him already, he had the sentences to run consecutively. Officer Jonathan Richard Schmidt. End of watch, April 13th, 2011.